There is a curious hysteria at the moment in British politics, and Nigel Farage, yet again, is treated not simply as a political opponent, but as a bogeyman, and Labour ministers are queuing up to imagine ever more bizarre dystopias should Reform UK ever enter government. Fish and chips destroyed, our daughters exposed to internet predators, our grandchildren stalked by ghosts of national scandals. It has a whiff of satire about it, and indeed many voters can smell the exaggeration, but this Farage fear also serves a purpose. It distracts from the failures of the two main parties. Both the Conservatives and Labour parties have been so chronically incapable of addressing the public's frustrations in crime, housing, immigration, NHS collapse that space has been created for Farage to walk into. In other words, his threat is not born of his genius, but of their inadequacy. Yet in this debate, one vital actor is consistently overlooked. That's the Lib Dems. They are the quiet shopkeepers of British democracy. You only have to look at the local councils. They have accumulated more MPs than at any point since the coalition era. They have historic competence in local governance, and unlike many of the new Reform councillors who promptly resign when the job proves difficult, Lib Dems stay the course. The possibility of a Labour-Lib Dem coalition is therefore far more realistic than any scenario that ends with Farage and Downing Street. YouGov polling shows 83% of Labour supporters would welcome such an alliance, and by contrast only a minority of the electorate would stomach a Labour reform or Tory reform deal. Ed Davies' party, despite the Horizon scandal shadowing his personal credibility, remains the most plausible rescue party of the next Parliament, prepared, pragmatic, and already used to the responsibility of governing. Nowhere is this clearer than in the debate about the future of the BBC. James Harding, once Director of News, has warned that Farage represents a direct threat to the corporation's existence. Reform's manifesto pledge to scrap the licence fee and dismiss the BBC as biased, wasteful and taxation without representation is worrying, and Farage is right to urge reform, but not the kind that Farage imagines. The BBC's independence must be constitutionally ring-fenced, placed beyond the whims of politicians, as secure as the Bank of England's mandate. Otherwise, a demagogue could one day hold it hostage. But note the paradox. The BBC's vulnerability to political interference is not a creation of Farage. It is the outcomes of decades of tinkering by both Labour and Conservative governments, both unable to resist the temptation of influence. Farage would merely inherit the tools they left behind. If the BBC is imperilled, it is because our mainstream parties have failed to lock its doors against precisely this sort of attack, and the obsession of the BBC itself with neutrality. So the future of British politics is not a binary choice between Keir Starmer's technology and technocracy and Nigel Farage's populist insurgency. There's a third player. The unfashionable, mocked and sometimes eccentric but resilient, the Lib Dems, who have too long been underestimated. Yet at local level, they demonstrate a competence that Reform has never matched. And in a hung Parliament, they are the obvious coalition partner. And the lesson is this. The lesson is clear. Fear of Farage may dominate the headlines, but the more sober calculation is that Britain's democratic system will be shaped less by him than by how Labour, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems manage the next settlement. If the BBC is to be saved, if the centre is to be stabilised, if the extremes are to be contained, it may well be Ed Davies' party, not Nigel Farage's, that comes once again to the nation's rescue.